Sarah Martinez had always been different. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she was the girl who climbed the tallest trees, who raced boys on bicycles, and one who never backed down from a challenge no matter how impossible it seemed. Her father, a retired Army sergeant, had taught her that strength wasn't just about muscles. It was about heart, determination, and the refusal to quit when everyone expected you to fail. At 18, with her high school diploma fresh in her hand and college applications sitting untouched on her desk, Sarah made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. She walked into the Marine Corps recruiting station on Main Street, her chin held high and her mind made up. The recruiter, Staff Sergeant Williams, looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "You sure about this, young lady?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many dreamers walk through those doors only to wash out within weeks. "The Marines aren't like the other branches. We don't make exceptions, and we don't go easy on anyone, especially not girls." Sarah interrupted, her green eyes flashing with the same fire that had gotten her into trouble throughout high school. "I'm not asking for exceptions, Sergeant. I'm asking for the chance to prove I belong." Staff Sergeant Williams leaned back in his chair, studying this young woman who stood before him with the posture of someone who had never learned the meaning of surrender. There was something about her, a quality he had seen in the best Marines he had ever served with. It wasn't size or strength, though she was clearly fit from years of athletics. It was something deeper, something that couldn't be taught or faked. "All right, Martinez," he said finally, pulling out the enlistment paperwork. "Let's see what you're made of." The months leading up to her departure for boot camp passed in a blur of physical preparation and mental conditioning. Sarah ran miles every morning before dawn, lifted weights at the local gym, and studied Marine Corps history until she could recite the battles and traditions in her sleep. Her family watched with a mixture of pride and concern as she transformed herself from a small-town girl into something harder, more focused. Her mother worried constantly, calling her friends who had sons in the military, seeking reassurance that wasn't coming. Her father, however, watched with quiet approval as Sarah pushed herself harder each day. He recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same look he had seen in the mirror 30 years ago when he first put on the uniform. "She's got what it takes," he told his wife one evening as they watched Sarah doing push-ups in the backyard, sweat pouring down her face as she powered through her 100th repetition. "The question isn't whether she's strong enough. The question is whether they'll give her the chance to show it." The day finally came when Sarah boarded the bus that would take her to Marine Corps Recruit Depot Paris Island. As the bus pulled away from the station, she pressed her face to the window and watched her hometown disappear behind her. Everything she had ever known was falling away, replaced by something unknown and terrifying and absolutely necessary. The other recruits on the bus were mostly men, and they eyed her with curiosity and barely concealed amusement. She could hear the whispered conversations, the jokes about how long she would last, the bets about whether she would make it through the first week. Sarah ignored them all, focusing instead on the rhythm of the road and the weight of the decision she had made. When the bus finally pulled through the gates of Paris Island, Sarah felt her stomach clench with a mixture of excitement and terror. The place looked exactly like what it was, a factory designed to break down civilians and rebuild them as Marines. The buildings were stark and functional, the grounds maintained with military precision. Even the air felt different here, charged with decades of sweat and determination and the dreams of those who had succeeded and failed before her. The drill instructors were waiting as the bus came to a stop. Sarah had expected them to be intimidating, but the reality was beyond anything she had imagined. They moved with the fluid precision of predators, their voices carrying across the humid South Carolina air like thunder. When they began screaming at the recruits to get off the bus, Sarah felt every nerve in her body come alive. "Move, move, move. You have 30 seconds to get your sorry selves off my bus and onto my yellow footprints. Anyone who takes longer than 30 seconds will be doing push-ups until I get tired of watching you sweat." Sarah was one of the first off the bus, her training bag clutched in her hands as she searched for the famous yellow footprints painted on the asphalt. She found them quickly and snapped to attention, her back straight and her eyes focused straight ahead. Around her, the other recruits scrambled to find their positions, some looking confused, others clearly fighting panic. Drill Instructor Gunnery Sergeant Thompson was a man who had spent 22 years in the Corps, serving in Iraq, Afghanistan, and half a dozen other places where Marines went to do the jobs no one else could do. He was built like a granite statue, his uniform pressed to perfection, his bearing radiating the kind of authority that came only from years of leading Marines in combat. When he spoke, his voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Welcome to Paris Island, recruits. For the next 13 weeks, your sorry lives belong to me and my fellow drill instructors. We are going to break you down and rebuild you from the ground up. Some of you will make it. Most of you will not. Those who do make it will earn the title of United States Marine. Those who don't will go home with their tails between their legs, wondering what might have been if they had been stronger, smarter, or more determined. His eyes swept over the formation of recruits, pausing briefly on Sarah before moving on. She could feel his assessment in that glance, could sense the skepticism that seemed to follow her wherever she went. But there was something else there too, a challenge, perhaps, or maybe just curiosity about what she would do when the real pressure started. You will notice that we have a female recruit among us, Gunny Thompson continued, his voice carrying clearly across the formation. This is not a social experiment. This is not about political correctness or equal opportunity. This young lady has volunteered to attempt to earn the same title that every other recruit here is attempting to earn. She will receive no special treatment, no reduced standards, and no sympathy when the training gets difficult. If she succeeds, it will be because she proved herself worthy of the title Marine. If she fails, it will be for the same reason anyone else fails, because she wasn't strong enough, smart enough, or determined enough to meet our standards. Sarah felt every eye in the formation turn toward her, felt the weight of expectations and prejudices settling on her shoulders like a heavy pack. Some of the looks were curious, others openly hostile. A few of the recruits were smirking, already convinced that she wouldn't last a week. Sarah kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral, but inside she felt something steel-hard settling into place. The first few hours at Paris Island were a blur of processing, paperwork, and the beginning of the systematic destruction of everything the recruits thought they knew about themselves. Sarah's hair was cut short, her civilian clothes were packed away, and she was issued the same gear as every other recruit. For the first time in months, she felt truly equal. Everyone looked equally confused, equally overwhelmed, and equally uncertain about what they had gotten themselves into. The barracks were divided by gender, but the training would be integrated. Sarah would compete directly with the male recruits in every aspect of the program except for certain physical standards that had been adjusted to account for physiological differences. But even those adjusted standards were higher than what was required in any other branch of the military. Her bunk was next to the window, and as she lay down that first night, Sarah could hear the sounds of Paris Island settling into its nighttime routine. Somewhere in the distance, another platoon was being run through night training exercises. The sound of boots on pavement and shouted commands drifted through the humid air, a constant reminder that the transformation had already begun. The recruit in the bunk next to hers was a kid from Ohio named Peterson. He was 18, skinny, and looked like he had never seen the inside of a gym in his life. As the lights went out, and the barracks fell silent, she heard him whisper in the darkness. "You really think you can make it through this?" he asked, his voice carrying just far enough for her to hear. Sarah turned her head toward him, though she could barely make out his outline in the darkness. "I know I can," she whispered back. "The question is whether you can." Peterson was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. Finally, he spoke again. "My dad was a Marine. He told me that the training would be the hardest thing I ever did, but that if I could make it through, I'd never have to prove myself to anyone ever again." "Your dad was right," Sarah replied. "But he probably never told you that some people will try to make it even harder for you. Some people will want you to fail just because they think you don't belong. Is that what you think will happen to you?" Peterson asked. Sarah stared up at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of 40 other recruits trying to fall asleep despite their nerves and excitement. "I don't think it will happen," she said quietly. "I know it will happen. The question isn't whether they'll try to break me. The question is whether I'll let them." The conversation ended there, but Sarah lay awake for hours afterward, her mind racing through everything she had learned about Marine Corps training, everything her father had told her about military life, and everything she would need to do to prove that she belonged among the few and the proud. Outside, the sounds of Paris Island continued, the distant calls of drill instructors, the rhythmic sound of recruits running in formation, the ever-present reminder that this was a place where ordinary people came to become something extraordinary. When reveille sounded at 0500 the next morning, Sarah was already awake. She had been lying in her bunk for 30 minutes, mentally preparing herself for the day ahead. Around her, the other recruits scrambled to respond to the piercing sound of the bugle call, some moving quickly and efficiently, others clearly struggling to process what was happening. Get up, get up, get up. You have exactly 4 minutes to get dressed, make your racks, and fallen outside for morning formation. Anyone who takes longer than 4 minutes will be explaining to me why they think their time is more valuable than mine. Drill Instructor Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was a woman who had earned her position through years of exemplary service and an unwavering commitment to excellence. She was smaller than the male drill instructors, but her presence filled the barracks like a force of nature. Sarah had heard about female drill instructors, but seeing one in person was both inspiring and intimidating. Sarah moved through the morning routine with practiced efficiency, her bunk made to perfect standards, her uniform immaculate. She had been practicing these skills for months, and it showed. Around her, other recruits struggled with the unfamiliar demands of military precision, but Sarah looked like she had been doing this for years. Outstanding, Recruit Martinez, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said as she inspected Sarah's bunk. This is what a properly made rack looks like, recruits. Study it, learn from it, and understand that this level of attention to detail is the minimum standard for everything you do while you're here. Sarah felt a moment of pride at the praise, but she kept her expression neutral. She had learned from her father that praise in the military was often followed by increased expectations, and she was right to be cautious. As the platoon formed up outside the barracks, she could see some of the other recruits looking at her with resentment, as if her success somehow diminished their own efforts. The first week of training was an exercise in controlled chaos. Every moment was structured, every activity designed to test the recruits' ability to follow orders, work as a team, and maintain their composure under extreme stress. Sarah excelled at most of the challenges, but she could feel the weight of constant scrutiny from both the drill instructors and her fellow recruits. During physical training, she kept pace with the fastest runners in the platoon. During drill and ceremony, her movements were precise and confident. During academic instruction, she absorbed information quickly and demonstrated a thorough understanding of Marine Corps history and traditions. But, with each success, she could sense the growing resentment from some of her fellow recruits. The comments started small, whispered jokes about affirmative action Marines, and speculation about whether she was receiving special treatment. Sarah ignored them at first, focusing on her own performance and trusting that excellence would speak louder than prejudice. But, as the days went on, the comments became more pointed, more personal, and more difficult to ignore. During chow time on Friday of the first week, Sarah sat with Peterson and a few other recruits who had shown themselves to be decent human beings. The conversation was quiet, focused mainly on the upcoming weekend training exercises and speculation about which recruits might not make it through the first phase of training. "I heard they're going to make the standards even harder for the female recruit," said a voice from the table behind them. Sarah didn't turn around, but she recognized the speaker as Recruit Johnson, a large kid from Alabama who had made no secret of his belief that women didn't belong in the Marines. "That's not how it works," Peterson said quietly, turning to face Johnson. "The standards are the standards. Nobody gets special treatment, good or bad." Johnson laughed, the sound carrying clearly across the mess hall. "You really believe that? Come on, Peterson. Everyone knows they're going to lower the standards for her, just like they do everywhere else. She'll get through training, get her little participation trophy, and then disappear into some desk job where she can't get any real Marines killed." Sarah felt every muscle in her body tense, but she kept her eyes on her food and her voice level. "Is there something you want to say to me directly, Johnson?" she asked, still not turning around. The mess hall seemed to grow quieter around them, other recruits sensing the tension and waiting to see what would happen. Johnson stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, and walked around to face Sarah's table. "Yeah, actually, there is," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent space. "I want to know what you're really doing here. This isn't some college psychology experiment. This is the Marines. Real Marines die when people aren't good enough to do their jobs. So what happens when you can't carry a wounded Marine to safety? What happens when you can't keep up on a 20-mile force march? What happens when the enemy is shooting at you and you freeze up because you never should have been here in the first place?" Sarah finally turned to look at Johnson, her green eyes meeting his with a steady, unwavering gaze. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear, but There was something in it that made everyone in the immediate area stop what they were doing to listen. "I guess we'll find out," she said simply. "But I can tell you one thing for certain. When that day comes, I'll be standing right next to you, doing my job, protecting my fellow Marines, and proving that I earned my place here just like everyone else. The question is whether you'll be able to keep up with me when it matters." Johnson's face reddened, and for a moment it looked like the confrontation might escalate into something physical. But before anything could happen, the voice of Drill Instructor Gunnery Sergeant Thompson cut across the mess hall like a whip crack. "What in the hell is going on over here?" he demanded, his presence instantly commanding the attention of every recruit in the building. "Did someone forget that this is a military chow hall and not a high school cafeteria? Did someone decide that they had time for social hour when they should be focusing on becoming Marines?" The recruits snapped to attention, their faces forward and their mouths shut. Gunny Thompson walked slowly between the tables, his eyes taking in every detail of the situation. When he reached Johnson, he stopped and stared at the recruit for what felt like an eternity. "Recruit Johnson," he said finally, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that was somehow more intimidating than shouting. "You seem to have something to say. Why don't you share it with all of us?" Johnson swallowed hard, his earlier bravado evaporating under the drill instructor's stare. "No excuse, sir," he managed to say. "No excuse for what, Recruit Johnson? No excuse for disrupting my chow hall? No excuse for creating drama where there should be focus? Or no excuse for forgetting that every person in this room volunteered to serve their country and deserves your respect until they prove otherwise?" "All of the above, sir," Johnson replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Gunny Thompson nodded slowly, then turned his attention to Sarah. "Recruit Martinez," he said, "do you have anything to add to this conversation?" Sarah met his eyes directly, her posture perfect and her voice steady. "No, sir," she said. "I'm here to become a Marine, just like everyone else." The drill instructor studied her for a moment longer, then addressed the entire mess hall. "Listen up, recruits. I'm going to explain something to you once, and I don't want to have to explain it again. Every person in this room volunteered to be here. Every person in this room is attempting to earn the title Marine. Some of you will succeed, and some of you will fail. But failure will not be because of anyone else's performance or anyone else's presence. Failure will be because you were not strong enough, smart enough, or determined enough to meet our standards. The Marine Corps has exactly one mission: to win battles and defend our nation. We don't care about your personal opinions, your prejudices, or your feelings. We care about your ability to do your job when it matters most. If you can't handle training alongside someone who looks different from you, talks different from you, or thinks different from you, then you don't have what it takes to be a Marine. Marines fight alongside all kinds of people in all kinds of places, and we trust each other with our lives. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to finish your chow in silence. Then you're going to return to your training schedule. And you're going to focus on your own performance instead of worrying about everyone else's. Because at the end of 13 weeks, there will be only one question that matters. Did you earn the title Marine? Everything else is just noise. The mess hall remained silent as Gunny Thompson walked out, his message delivered with the kind of clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. Sarah finished her meal quickly and returned to the barracks, but she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes following her every move. Some of those looks were hostile, others curious, but a few seemed to carry something like respect. That night, as the platoon prepared for lights out, Peterson approached her bunk. "That was pretty impressive," he said quietly. "The way you handled Johnson, I mean." Sarah looked up from the letter she was writing to her parents. "I didn't handle Johnson," she said. "Gunny Thompson handled Johnson. I just didn't back down." "Same thing," Peterson replied. "Most people would have gotten angry or tried to argue. You just stated facts and let him make an idiot of himself." Sarah considered this for a moment. "My father taught me that the best way to win an argument is to let the other person prove your point for you," she said. "Johnson proved my point better than I ever could have." "What was your point?" Peterson asked. Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving at Paris Island. "That I belong here just as much as anyone else, and that I'm not going anywhere." As the lights went out and the barracks settled into the quiet rhythm of sleep, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about the confrontation with Johnson and Gunny Thompson's speech. She knew that the incident in the mess hall was just the beginning. The real challenges would come during the physical training, the combat exercises, and the moments when the pressure was highest and the margin for error was smallest. But she also knew something that her critics didn't understand. She hadn't come to Paris Island to prove that women could be Marines. She had come to prove that Sarah Martinez could be a Marine. The difference was subtle but important. She wasn't representing anyone but herself, wasn't carrying anyone's expectations but her own. She was here because she believed she had what it took to earn the title, and no amount of skepticism or hostility was going to change that. The second week of training brought new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. The physical training intensified, with longer runs, more challenging obstacle courses, and combat training that required strength, agility, and tactical thinking. Sarah met every challenge with determination and skill, but she could sense that some of the drill instructors were watching her more closely than the other recruits. During a particularly grueling session on the obstacle course, Sarah found herself paired with recruit Williams, a quiet kid from Michigan who had kept mostly to himself during the first week. Williams was struggling with some of the more demanding obstacles, and Sarah found herself in a position to either help him or focus solely on her own performance. The choice was easy. Sarah stayed with Williams, coaching him through the more difficult sections and making sure he completed the course successfully. It cost her some time on her own performance, but she finished well within the required standards and felt good about her decision to help a fellow recruit. Drill Instructor Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting at the end of the course. "Interesting choice, Recruit Martinez," she said as Sarah came to attention. "You could have finished in the top 5 if you had focused on yourself instead of babying Recruit Williams." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "But Recruit Williams finished the course, and that's more important than my individual time." Rodriguez studied her for a moment. "Why?" she asked. "Because Marines don't leave people behind, ma'am," Sarah answered. "Individual performance matters, but team success matters more." The drill instructor nodded slowly. "Outstanding, Recruit Martinez. That's exactly the right answer. But understand this. There will be times when you have to choose between helping someone else and accomplishing the mission. The mission comes first, always. But when you can do both, when you can succeed and help others succeed, that's when you start to understand what it really means to be a Marine." As the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to find her rhythm within the platoon. The initial hostility from some recruits began to fade, replaced by a grudging respect for her performance and her attitude. She wasn't the strongest recruit in the platoon, but she was consistently in the top tier for every category of training. More importantly, she demonstrated the kind of leadership and character that the drill instructors were looking for in their Marines. But Sarah knew that the real test was still coming. The training would get harder, the pressure would increase, and eventually she would face a challenge that would test not just her physical abilities, but her mental toughness and her determination to succeed no matter what obstacles were placed in her path. She was right to be cautious. The hardest days of her life were still ahead of her, and they would come from a direction she never expected. The third week of training brought a new drill instructor to the platoon, and with him came a level of intensity that made the previous weeks seem like preparation. Drill Instructor Staff Sergeant Marcus Kane was a combat veteran with 3 deployments to Afghanistan and a reputation for producing some of the finest Marines to come out of Paris Island. He was also known for his old-school approach to training and his belief that certain traditions should remain unchanged. Kane was built like a heavyweight boxer, with shoulders that seemed to strain against his uniform and hands that looked like they could crush concrete. His voice carried the authority of someone who had led Marines in actual combat, and when he spoke, even the other drill instructors listened. Sarah could see immediately that Kane represented a different kind of challenge than anything she had faced so far. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kane announced as he introduced himself to the platoon, "my name is Staff Sergeant Kane, and I am here to ensure that you understand exactly what it means to be a United States Marine. Some of you may have heard that I have old-fashioned ideas about certain things. You heard correctly. I believe that there are roles that some people are naturally suited for, and roles that others are not. I believe that nature designed men and women for different purposes, and no amount of political correctness is going to change biology." Sarah felt her stomach tighten as Kane's eyes found her in the formation. She could see where this was heading, and she knew that the next few weeks would test her in ways she had never imagined. However, Kane continued, his voice carrying across the formation, "I also believe in the Marine Corps standard of excellence. If someone can meet our standards, if someone can prove themselves worthy of the title Marine, then they have earned my respect regardless of what they look like or where they come from. The question is whether certain people can actually meet those standards when the pressure is real and the stakes are life and death. The training under Kane's supervision became immediately more challenging. The physical demands increased, but, more importantly, the mental pressure intensified. Kane had a way of identifying each recruit's weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. For some, it was fear of heights during obstacle courses. For others, it was claustrophobia during combat simulations. For Sarah, Kane seemed determined to test her physical limits at every opportunity. During combat training exercises, Kane consistently paired Sarah with the largest and strongest male recruits. During hand-to-hand combat instruction, he made sure she faced opponents who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. During weapons training, he positioned her in scenarios where she would have to carry equipment loads that pushed her to her absolute physical limits. The enemy isn't going to give you a lighter pack because you're a woman, Recruit Martinez, Kane explained during one particularly grueling exercise where Sarah was struggling to keep up with a forced march while carrying a full combat load. The wounded Marine you're trying to evacuate isn't going to lose weight just because you're having trouble lifting him. If you can't meet the physical demands of the job, then you don't belong here, period. Sarah gritted her teeth and pushed through the pain, refusing to slow down or ask for help. Around her, several male recruits were also struggling with the pace and the weight, but Kane's attention remained focused primarily on her performance. She could feel the eyes of the entire platoon watching her, waiting to see if she would break under the pressure. Outstanding effort, Recruit Martinez, Kane said as she crossed the finish line well within the required time standard. But effort isn't enough in combat. In combat, you either complete the mission or people die. There's no participation trophy for trying hard. The constant pressure began to take its toll on Sarah's relationship with some of her fellow recruits. Some of them resented the extra attention she was receiving, even though that attention was clearly not positive. Others began to distance themselves from her, afraid that associating with her would draw Kane's scrutiny to their own performance. During evening hygiene time, Sarah overheard a conversation between several recruits who didn't realize she was within earshot. "Kane's trying to break her," said Recruit Thompson, a kid from Georgia who had been consistently supportive throughout the training. "He's pushing her harder than anyone else in the platoon." "Maybe she needs to be pushed harder," replied Recruit Davis, whose attitude towards Sarah had grown increasingly hostile as the training progressed. "Maybe Kane knows something we don't know. Maybe he's trying to prove that she doesn't belong here before someone gets hurt in the fleet." "That's not how it works," Thompson argued. "The standards are the same for everyone. If she meets the standards, she earns the title just like the rest of us." "Standards on paper," Davis shot back. "But what about standards in reality? What happens when we're deployed and she can't carry her weight? What happens when someone dies because she wasn't strong enough to do her job?" Sarah had heard enough. She stepped around the corner and faced the group of recruits, her expression calm but her eyes flashing with controlled anger. "If you have something to say about my performance, you can say it to my face," she said quietly. "But if you want to question whether I can do my job, let's settle it right here and now. Pick any physical challenge you want. Let's see who can't carry their weight." Davis stepped forward, his chest puffed out, and his face flushed with anger. "You want to settle this? Fine. Let's settle this. Tomorrow during PT, you and me, head-to-head. Obstacle course, full combat gear. Winner gets to decide whether the loser belongs in this platoon." "That's enough." The voice of Drill Instructor Gunnery Sergeant Thompson cut through the tension like a blade. "What in the hell is going on here? Did someone decide that this barracks was now a social club where recruits get to challenge each other to duels?" The recruits snapped to attention, their personal conflict immediately forgotten in the face of Thompson's authority. Sarah could see that the senior drill instructor had been observing the situation longer than anyone realized. "Recruit Davis," Thompson said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that was more intimidating than shouting. "You seem to have concerns about your fellow recruits' performance. Instead of discussing those concerns like a professional, you decided to issue challenges like you're in middle school. Do I have that right?" "Sir, Davis began, but Thompson cut him off. "Did I ask you to explain yourself, Recruit Davis? When I want your opinion, I will request it. Until then, you will keep your mouth shut and your focus on your own performance." Thompson turned his attention to the rest of the group. "The same goes for all of you. You are here to become Marines, not to play politics or engage in playground confrontations." Thompson's gaze settled on Sarah, and she could see him evaluating her response to the situation. "Recruit Martinez," he said, "do you have anything to contribute to this conversation?" Sarah considered her words carefully before responding. "No, sir," she said finally. I'm here to meet the standards and earn my place just like everyone else. Outstanding, Thompson replied. That's exactly the right attitude. But understand this. There will always be people who question whether you belong, whether you can do the job, whether you have what it takes. Some of those people will be enemies trying to kill you. Others will be people who are supposed to be on your side. Your response to both types of people needs to be the same. Prove them wrong through your performance, not your words. As Thompson walked away, Sarah felt the weight of his advice settling on her shoulders. She knew he was right, but she also knew that proving herself through performance was easier said than done when the system seemed designed to make her fail. The next morning brought a new challenge that would test not just Sarah's physical abilities, but her mental toughness as well. Staff Sergeant Kane announced that the platoon would be participating in combat simulation exercises designed to replicate the stress and confusion of actual battle. Today you will learn what it feels like to be shot at, Kane explained as the recruits gathered around a series of combat scenarios set up on the training grounds. You will learn what it feels like to have your plans fall apart under pressure. You will learn what it feels like to make life and death decisions when you don't have enough information and you don't have enough time. The exercises were intense and realistic, involving live ammunition, explosive simulators, and scenarios designed to push the recruits to their physical and mental limits. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with Davis, Thompson, and 2 other recruits for a mission that required them to assault a fortified position while under simulated enemy fire. As the team leader, Davis was responsible for coordinating the attack and ensuring that all team members reached their objectives safely. Sarah could see the conflict playing out in his mind. He wanted to prove that she couldn't handle combat stress, but he also couldn't afford to fail the mission because of his personal prejudices. Martinez, he said as they prepared for the exercise, you take point. Thompson and Williams will provide covering fire. Johnson and I will flank left and assault the primary objective. Sarah recognized the assignment for what it was. Davis was putting her in the most dangerous position, hoping that she would freeze under pressure or make a mistake that would prove his point about her capabilities. She also recognized that arguing about the assignment would only validate his assumptions about her ability to follow orders under stress. Roger that, she replied simply, checking her equipment and preparing to move into position. The simulation began with a thunderous explosion that shook the ground beneath their feet. Immediately, the training area was filled with the sound of simulated gunfire, shouted orders, and the controlled chaos that Kane had promised. Sarah moved forward under cover, her rifle ready, and her focus absolute. The fortified position was defended by instructors armed with paintball weapons designed to simulate enemy fire. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from several positions, and the sound of paintball rounds impacting around her was surprisingly realistic. Her training took over, and she found herself moving with a fluidity and confidence that surprised even her. She reached the first objective, a simulated enemy position that needed to be neutralized before the rest of the team could advance. Using hand signals, she communicated with Thompson and Williams, coordinating their covering fire while she maneuvered into position for the assault. The moment came when Sarah had to leave cover and assault the position directly. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, to wait for backup, to avoid the risk of being killed by the defenders. But the mission required someone to take that risk, and Davis had assigned that responsibility to her. Sarah took a deep breath and exploded from cover, her rifle firing as she moved toward the objective. The defenders immediately concentrated their fire on her position, but her movement was too quick and too unpredictable. She reached the fortified position and eliminated both defenders with precise shots, clearing the way for her team to advance. Outstanding work, Martinez, shouted Instructor Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from her position as an observer. Textbook assault technique. But the exercise was far from over. As Sarah's team regrouped and prepared to assault the main objective, they discovered that Davis had been killed during his flanking maneuver. Thompson automatically assumed command of the team, but the loss of their designated leader added a new level of complexity to an already challenging scenario. Martinez, Thompson called out over the simulated gunfire. We need someone to get to that machine gun nest on the right flank. If we can't neutralize it, this whole assault is going to fail. Sarah looked at the position Thompson was indicating. It was heavily defended, well-positioned, and would require someone to cross open ground under direct fire to reach it. It was, by any reasonable assessment, a suicide mission. I've got it, Sarah replied without hesitation. Thompson grabbed her arm as she prepared to move. Sarah, that's not a good idea. We need to find another way. Sarah looked at him with the same steady gaze she had used on Johnson in the mess hall weeks earlier. There is no other way, she said quietly. Someone has to take that position, and I'm the fastest runner in the squad. If anyone can make it, it's me. Before Thompson could argue further, Sarah was moving. She sprinted across the open ground between her position and the machine gun nest, zigzagging to avoid the concentrated fire from multiple defenders. Paintball rounds whistled past her head and impacted the ground around her feet, but she kept moving forward with single-minded determination. The distance seemed to stretch forever, but Sarah's training and natural athleticism carried her across the killing field faster than the defenders had expected. She dove into the fortified position just as a paintball round grazed her shoulder, close enough to count as a hit, but not decisive enough to eliminate her from the exercise. The two instructors manning the machine gun nest were shocked to see Sarah materialize in their position. They were so surprised that they hesitated for a crucial second before trying to bring their weapons to bear on her. That second was all Sarah needed. She eliminated both defenders with quick, accurate shots and immediately turned the captured machine gun on the remaining enemy positions. The exercise ended with Sarah's team successfully completing their mission, but, more importantly, it ended with every instructor and recruit on the training ground understanding that Sarah Martinez was not just capable of meeting the standards, she was capable of exceeding them when the pressure was highest. Staff Sergeant Kane was the first to reach Sarah's position after the exercise ended. His expression was unreadable as he looked down at the young recruit who had just accomplished something that most male Marines would have found challenging. Interesting technique, Recruit Martinez, he said finally. Completely insane, tactically unsound, and effective as hell. Where did you learn to move like that? Sarah came to attention, her uniform covered in dirt, and her face streaked with sweat. High school track and field, sir, she replied. I ran the 100-meter dash and the 400. My coach always said that sometimes you just have to outrun the problem. Kane studied her for a long moment, and Sarah could see something shifting in his expression. It wasn't approval exactly, but it wasn't the skepticism she had grown accustomed to either. Well, Martinez, he said finally, you definitely outran the problem today. But understand this, luck runs out eventually. Raw talent runs out eventually. The only thing that doesn't run out is training, discipline, and the refusal to quit when everything goes wrong. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes, sir, Sarah replied. I understand that today was just one exercise. I understand that I need to prove myself every single day. Kane nodded slowly. Outstanding. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Because tomorrow we're going to find out what you're really made of. Tomorrow we start advanced combat training, and I'm going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed in your life. If you think today was challenging, you haven't seen anything yet. As the platoon returned to the barracks that evening, Sarah could feel that something fundamental had shifted in her relationship with her fellow recruits. The successful completion of the combat exercise had answered questions about her abilities that words never could have addressed. Davis approached her as she cleaned her equipment, his expression thoughtful rather than hostile. That was pretty impressive out there, he said quietly. The way you took that machine gun nest, I'm not sure I would have had the guts to try that. Sarah looked up from her rifle, surprised by Davis's change in attitude. It wasn't about guts, she said. It was about the mission. Someone had to take that position, and I happened to be in the best position to try. Davis nodded, considering her words. Yeah, but there's a difference between knowing what needs to be done and actually doing it. What you did out there, that was Marine Corps leadership. I may not have believed it before, but I believe it now. The apology was awkward and incomplete, but Sarah recognized it as a genuine attempt to acknowledge that his previous assumptions had been wrong. We're all here for the same reason, she replied. We all want to earn the title Marine. That's what matters. As the weeks continued, Sarah found that her performance in the combat exercise had earned her a different kind of respect from both the instructors and her fellow recruits. The constant questions about her capabilities began to fade, replaced by recognition that she had proven herself under the most demanding conditions. But Staff Sergeant Kane was true to his word. The advanced combat training that followed was more challenging than anything Sarah had experienced. The physical demands increased, the scenarios became more complex, and the margin for error grew smaller. Kane seemed determined to find the limit of Sarah's abilities, pushing her through exercises that tested not just her strength and speed, but her tactical thinking and leadership capabilities. During night combat training, Sarah found herself leading a patrol through swampland that seemed designed to challenge every aspect of her military skills. The mission required stealth, navigation, and the ability to make quick decisions under pressure while responsible for the lives of 4 other recruits. The patrol was moving through knee-deep water when they encountered what appeared to be an enemy ambush. Sarah had seconds to decide whether to retreat, take cover, or assault through the ambush, and her decision would determine whether her team completed the mission or failed spectacularly. Sarah chose to assault through the ambush, leading her team in a coordinated attack that caught the defending instructors off guard. The maneuver was risky and aggressive, but it worked. Her team completed the mission successfully and earned praise from Kane himself. "That was good tactical thinking, Martinez," Kane said as the exercise concluded. "You recognized that retreating would have given the enemy time to call for reinforcements, and taking cover would have given them time to maneuver around your position. Assaulting through the ambush was the right call, even though it was the most dangerous option." Sarah felt a surge of pride at Kane's praise, but she also recognized that each success raised the bar for future performance. Kane was no longer testing whether she could meet the basic standards. He was testing whether she could exceed them consistently under the most challenging conditions. The realization that she had earned Kane's respect was both satisfying and sobering. She knew that the most difficult challenges were still ahead, and that proving herself once was not the same as proving herself consistently over time. But she also knew that she had crossed an important threshold. She was no longer fighting just to prove that she belonged. She was fighting to prove that she could be one of the best Marines to come out of Paris Island. The stage was set for the final phase of training, where Sarah would face challenges that would test everything she had learned and everything she believed about herself. The young woman who had walked through the recruiter's door months earlier was gone, replaced by someone harder, stronger, and more confident. But the ultimate test was still to come, and it would arrive in a form that none of them expected. The 8th week of training brought an unexpected addition to the instructor staff at Paris Island. Master Sergeant Vincent "Iron Mike" Kowalski was a legend in the Marine Corps, a former Force Recon operator with 5 combat deployments, and a reputation for being one of the toughest instructors in the entire training pipeline. His arrival at Sarah's training platoon was both an honor and a warning that the most challenging phase of their education was about to begin. Kowalski was different from the other instructors in subtle but important ways. Where Staff Sergeant Kane relied on intensity and constant pressure, Kowalski possessed a quiet confidence that came from years of leading Marines in the most dangerous missions imaginable. His presence filled a room without him having to raise his voice, and when he spoke, even the other drill instructors paid attention. "Recruits," Kowalski said as he introduced himself to the platoon, "my name is Master Sergeant Kowalski, and I am here to teach you about something that cannot be learned from books or lectures. I am here to teach you about heart. You have spent the past 7 weeks learning to follow orders, execute basic tactics, and meet physical standards. That foundation is important, but it is not enough. Being a Marine requires something deeper, something that emerges only when everything else has been stripped away, and you are forced to rely on who you really are underneath the uniform." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as Kowalski's eyes swept over the formation. She had heard stories about Master Sergeant Kowalski from instructors who spoke about him in hushed, reverent tones. He was known for designing training scenarios that pushed Marines beyond their breaking points, not to break them, but to discover what they were truly capable of when pushed to their absolute limits. Over the next 2 weeks, Kowalski continued, "You will face challenges that are designed to test not just your physical capabilities, but your mental toughness, your moral character, and your commitment to the Marines standing next to you. Some of you will discover strengths you never knew you possessed. Others will discover weaknesses that must be addressed before you can be trusted with the lives of fellow Marines. The choice of which category you fall into is entirely up to you." The training under Kowalski's supervision immediately took on a different character. The exercises became more psychological in nature, designed to create situations where technical proficiency was less important than character and determination. Sarah found herself facing scenarios that had no clear right answers, where every choice involved significant risk, and where success required her to trust her instincts even when they contradicted her training. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah's squad was tasked with rescuing a wounded Marine from a hostile area while under constant enemy fire. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible. The casualty was positioned in a location that could only be reached by exposing the entire rescue team to enemy fire, and the window for extraction was rapidly closing. Sarah studied the situation carefully, weighing the risks and considering alternatives. Every conventional approach would result in multiple casualties among her team, but abandoning the wounded Marine was not an option. Finally, she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "I'm going in alone," she announced to her team. "The rest of you provide covering fire, and be ready to extract both of us when I signal." "Martinez, that's suicide," protested recruit Wilson, who had been assigned as the squad's medic for the exercise. "There's no way you can reach him and get back alive." Sarah looked at Wilson with the same steady confidence that had carried her through every previous challenge. "Maybe not," she said. "But if I don't try, he's definitely going to die. And if I can draw their fire away from you, you'll be in position to help both of us if I can make it work." Before anyone could argue further, Sarah was moving. She sprinted toward the casualty position, using every piece of cover available while drawing the concentrated fire of the defending instructors. The plan was working. The defenders were so focused on her movement that they temporarily ignored the rest of her squad. Sarah reached the wounded Marine and immediately began the process of preparing him for extraction. The instructor playing the casualty was impressed by her speed and efficiency under pressure, but the real test was still ahead, getting both of them back to safety while under direct fire from multiple positions. "Can you move?" Sarah asked the wounded Marine. "Negative," the instructor replied, staying in character. "Left leg is broken. You're going to have to carry me." Sarah looked at the instructor, who outweighed her by at least 60 pounds, and then, at the distance she would have to cover to reach safety. The math was simple and unforgiving. She was not strong enough to carry him at the speed necessary to avoid being shot by the defenders. But she was fast enough to move him in stages, using available cover to minimize their exposure. "Hold on," she told the casualty. "This is going to be rough." Sarah began moving the injured Marine in short bursts, dragging him from cover to cover while her squad provided suppressive fire. The defenders adjusted their tactics to account for her movement pattern, but Sarah was thinking faster than they were adapting. She used smoke grenades to obscure their movement, misdirection to confuse the defenders about their route, and pure determination to cover ground that should have been impossible to cross. The extraction took nearly 20 minutes, an eternity in a combat scenario, but Sarah successfully moved the casualty to safety without taking a decisive hit from the defenders. When the exercise ended, Master Sergeant Kowalski was the first to reach her position. "Outstanding work, Martinez," he said, his voice carrying genuine approval. "That was one of the most innovative tactical solutions I've seen from a recruit in 15 years. But, more importantly, it demonstrated something that can't be taught: the refusal to accept that a fellow Marine is expendable." Sarah came to attention, her uniform soaked with sweat, and her breathing still labored from the exertion. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say. Kowalski studied her for a moment, and Sarah could see him making some kind of internal assessment. "Tell me something, Martinez," he said finally. "What made you think you could pull that off when conventional wisdom said it was impossible?" Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. "I didn't think about whether it was possible, sir," she said. "I just thought about what needed to be done and figured out how to do it." Kowalski nodded slowly, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That's exactly the right answer," he said. "But understand this. What you accomplished today required more than just determination. It required tactical thinking, physical conditioning, and the ability to inspire your team to perform beyond their normal capabilities. Those are leadership qualities, and leadership comes with responsibility. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Throughout her training, she had focused on proving that she could meet the same standards as everyone else. The idea that she might be capable of exceeding those standards and taking on leadership responsibilities was both exciting and intimidating. "I think so, sir," she replied honestly. "But I know I still have a lot to learn." "Outstanding," Kowalski said. "That's the kind of humility that separates good leaders from great ones. But learning requires being challenged, and I'm about to challenge you in ways that will make today's exercise look like a warm-up." Kowalski was true to his word. Over the following days, Sarah found herself facing scenarios that pushed her far beyond anything she had experienced during the earlier phases of training. She was placed in leadership positions where her decisions affected the success or failure of entire missions. She was confronted with moral dilemmas that had no clear right answers. She was pushed to physical limits that she had never imagined possible. During a particularly intense night exercise, Sarah's squad was tasked with infiltrating an enemy compound and retrieving intelligence that was critical to the success of a larger operation. The mission required them to move through several miles of difficult terrain, avoid multiple enemy patrols, and complete their objective without being detected. Sarah was designated as the squad leader for the mission, a responsibility that she had earned through her consistent performance during previous exercises. But leadership in a training environment was different from leadership under the pressure of a complex mission where every decision could mean the difference between success and failure. The infiltration phase went smoothly, with Sarah's squad avoiding enemy patrols and reaching the compound without being detected. But as they prepared to enter the target building, they discovered that the situation was more complex than their initial intelligence had indicated. The building was more heavily guarded than expected, and their planned route to the objective had been compromised by additional enemy positions. Sarah had to make a quick decision: abort the mission and return with her squad intact, or adapt the plan and attempt to complete the objective despite the increased risk. She knew that aborting would be the safe choice, but she also knew that the intelligence they were supposed to retrieve was critical to the success of the larger operation. Change of plans, Sarah whispered to her squad as they regrouped outside the compound. Peterson and Williams, you're going to create a distraction on the north side of the building. Make some noise and draw the guards away from the main entrance. Thompson and Davis, you're coming with me. We're going to use the distraction to access the building through the east entrance. That's not the plan we rehearsed, Davis pointed out. If something goes wrong, we won't have backup procedures in place. Sarah looked at him steadily. The plan we rehearsed assumed the intelligence was accurate. It wasn't. So we adapt. That's what Marines do. The modified plan worked perfectly. Peterson and Williams created enough noise to draw the guards away from their positions, allowing Sarah's team to enter the building and retrieve the intelligence without being detected. The mission was completed successfully, but, more importantly, Sarah had demonstrated the ability to think tactically under pressure and make command decisions that balanced risk with mission requirements. Master Sergeant Kowalski was waiting for them at the extraction point. Solid tactical thinking, Martinez, he said as the squad reported their success. You recognized that the situation had changed and adapted your plan accordingly. But, tell me this, what would you have done if the distraction hadn't worked and your team had been compromised? Sarah had been thinking about that exact question during the extraction. We had 3 backup plans, sir, she replied. If the distraction failed, Peterson and Williams would have withdrawn to position Alpha and provided covering fire while we exited through the south window. If we were compromised inside the building, Thompson would have destroyed the intelligence to prevent it from being captured while Davis and I fought our way to the extraction point. If everything went completely wrong, we would have scattered to individual rally points and attempted to extract separately. Kowalski raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by the depth of her contingency planning. You developed 3 backup plans on the fly while leading the mission? He asked. Yes, sir, Sarah replied. My father always taught me that no plan survives contact with reality, so you better have several more ready to go. Your father sounds like a smart man, Kowalski said. And you sound like someone who's beginning to understand what real leadership looks like. The praise from Master Sergeant Kowalski was significant, but Sarah knew that it also meant the challenges would continue to escalate. She was right. Over the final weeks of training, Kowalski designed scenarios that pushed her to the absolute limits of her capabilities and beyond. During one exercise, Sarah found herself in command of a squad that included several recruits who had been openly hostile to her presence during the early weeks of training. The mission was complex and dangerous, requiring the squad to complete multiple objectives while operating in hostile territory. Success depended not just on Sarah's leadership abilities, but on her capacity to inspire confidence and loyalty from Marines who had previously questioned her right to be there. The exercise began with the squad conducting a reconnaissance mission deep in enemy territory. Sarah's job was to gather intelligence on enemy positions while avoiding detection and keeping her squad safe. But, as the mission progressed, they received orders to shift from reconnaissance to a direct action mission. They were to assault and destroy an enemy communications facility that had been identified as critical to the enemy's ability to coordinate their operations. The change in mission parameters meant that Sarah had to completely reorganize her squad and develop new tactics on the fly. She had to assess each Marine's capabilities and assign roles that maximized their strengths while minimizing their weaknesses. Most importantly, She had to do all of this while maintaining the confidence and trust of Marines who were still learning to see her as a legitimate leader. "Listen up," Sarah said as she gathered her squad around her for the mission brief. "We've got a new objective, and it's not going to be easy. But I know what each of you is capable of, and I know we can get this done if we work together." She assigned roles based on each Marine's demonstrated strengths during previous training exercises, placing Johnson in charge of the assault team because of his size and aggressiveness, giving Davis responsibility for the support team because of his tactical knowledge, and keeping Peterson close to her as a runner because of his speed and reliability. The assault on the communications facility was textbook perfect. Sarah's planning was thorough, her execution was flawless, and her leadership inspired her squad to perform beyond their normal capabilities. The facility was destroyed without casualties, and the squad extracted successfully despite heavy enemy pursuit. But the real test came during the extraction phase, when one of Sarah's Marines was wounded during the withdrawal and required immediate medical attention. The wounded Marine was Johnson, the same recruit who had been most vocal about his doubts regarding her capabilities during the early weeks of training. Sarah had a choice to make. The medically correct decision would be to evacuate Johnson immediately, even if it meant aborting other aspects of the mission. The tactically correct decision might be to continue with the mission while one Marine provided medical support to Johnson. Sarah chose a third option. She reorganized her squad to continue the mission while personally ensuring that Johnson received the medical attention he needed. "Davis, you're in command of the squad," Sarah said as she assessed Johnson's condition. "Continue with the extraction plan. Peterson, you're staying with me to help with Johnson. We'll catch up with you at Rally Point Bravo." Davis looked uncertain about taking command in the middle of a complex mission. "Martinez, are you sure about this? We're stronger if we stay together." Sarah met his eyes with the confidence that had carried her through every challenge of the past 10 weeks. "I'm sure," she said. "Johnson took care of the mission. Now it's our turn to take care of Johnson. That's what Marines do." The decision to split her squad was risky, but it worked. Davis successfully led the main group to the extraction point while Sarah and Peterson provided medical care to Johnson and then moved him to safety despite his injuries and the continuing enemy pursuit. When the exercise ended, Master Sergeant Kowalski approached Sarah with an expression that she had never seen from him before. It was something close to genuine respect, mixed with what might have been pride. "That was exceptional leadership, Martinez," he said quietly. "You completed a complex mission, adapted to changing circumstances, and demonstrated that you understand the most important principle of Marine Corps leadership. Mission first, Marines always." But the most impressive thing was watching your squad respond to your leadership. Those Marines trust you now. They trust you because you've proven that you're willing to put their welfare ahead of your own advancement. Sarah felt a surge of emotion that caught her off guard. Throughout the entire training experience, she had focused on proving her individual capabilities and meeting the standards required to earn the title Marine. But somewhere along the way, she had become something more than just a successful recruit. She had become a leader. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say. Kowalski studied her for a moment longer. "You know, Martinez, when you first arrived here, I wasn't sure what to make of you. I've seen a lot of recruits who were trying to prove something to the world, and most of them wash out because they're more focused on making a statement than on becoming Marines. But you're different. You weren't trying to prove that women can be Marines. You were trying to prove that Sarah Martinez can be a Marine. There's a big difference, and it's the difference between political symbolism and genuine military leadership." The observation struck Sarah as profoundly accurate. She had never thought of her journey in those terms, but Kowalski was right. Her motivation had always been personal rather than political, individual rather than ideological. "I just wanted to earn my place, sir," she replied. "And you have," Kowalski said. "But earning your place was just the beginning. Now you have to decide what you're going to do with the opportunity you've created for yourself and for the Marines who will serve under your command in the future." As the final weeks of training approached, Sarah found herself in a position she had never expected to occupy. She was not just one of the top-performing recruits in her platoon. She was being recognized as a potential leader among her peers. The other recruits looked to her for guidance during complex exercises, and the instructors increasingly placed her in positions of responsibility that tested her leadership capabilities rather than just her individual skills. But with increased recognition came increased scrutiny, and Sarah knew that her greatest challenges were still ahead. The graduation exercises would test everything she had learned, and She would be expected to perform not just as an individual Marine, but as a leader capable of inspiring others to achieve excellence under the most demanding conditions. The stage was set for the final test, and Sarah was as ready as she could possibly be. But she was about to learn that readiness and preparation could only take her so far. The ultimate challenge would require her to reach deep inside herself and find qualities that could not be taught or trained, qualities that define the difference between a good Marine and an exceptional one. That the final phase of training at Paris Island was known as the Crucible, a 54-hour combat simulation designed to test everything the recruits had learned during their 13 weeks of training. It was the ultimate test of physical endurance, mental toughness, and teamwork under extreme stress. For Sarah, it represented the final opportunity to prove that she belonged among the Marines who would graduate and earn the title she had worked so hard to achieve. But 3 days before the Crucible was scheduled to begin, Master Sergeant Kowalski announced that their platoon would be participating in a special advanced training exercise that would serve as preparation for the final test. The exercise was designed by a visiting instructor from the Marine Corps Martial Arts program, a man whose reputation preceded him and whose presence at Paris Island was both an honor and a warning that the recruits were about to face something unprecedented. Gunnery Sergeant Roberto "the Hammer" Vasquez was a legend in Marine Corps hand-to-hand combat training. He was a former heavyweight boxer who had won the All-Marine Championships 3 consecutive times before transitioning to martial arts instruction. His nickname came not from his punching power, though that was considerable, but from his ability to break down the mental barriers that prevented Marines from reaching their full potential in combat situations. Vasquez was built like a professional athlete, with the kind of physical presence that commanded immediate respect and attention. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing was perfect, and his eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who had never met a challenge he couldn't overcome. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute expertise combined with years of teaching Marines how to survive and win in the most dangerous situations imaginable. "Marines," Vasquez said as he introduced himself to the platoon, "I am here to teach you about something that cannot be learned from manuals or lectures. I am here to teach you about fighting, not the technical aspects of combat. You've already learned those. I'm here to teach you about what happens inside your head when someone is trying to kill you, and your survival depends on your ability to fight back with everything you have." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as Vasquez's eyes swept over the formation. She had excelled at every aspect of training so far, but hand-to-hand combat had always been her biggest concern. She was fast, she was technically proficient, and she was mentally tough, but she was also smaller than most of the male Marines she would be expected to fight alongside, and potentially against, in real combat situations. "Combat is not a sport," Vasquez continued. "Combat is not a competition with rules and referees. Combat is about survival, and survival requires you to access parts of yourself that you may not know exist. Over the next 3 days, I am going to push every one of you beyond your comfort zone, beyond your perceived limitations, and beyond your fear of getting hurt. Some of you will discover that you are capable of far more than you ever imagined. Others will discover that they need to work harder to develop the warrior mindset that every Marine must possess." The training under Vasquez's supervision was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during her time at Paris Island. Where other instructors had focused on technique and conditioning, Vasquez focused on the psychological aspects of combat. He created scenarios designed to generate real stress, real fear, and real aggression, then taught the recruits how to channel those emotions into effective fighting techniques. During the first day of training, Sarah found herself paired against progressively larger and stronger opponents, each one designed to test her ability to overcome physical disadvantages through superior technique and mental toughness. Vasquez watched every match carefully, offering guidance and correction, but also allowing the recruits to learn through experience what worked and what didn't in real combat situations. "Martinez," Vasquez called out after Sarah had successfully defeated her third opponent of the day, "you fight like someone who's afraid of hurting your opponent. That's going to get you killed in real combat. Your job is not to fight fair. Your job is to win quickly and decisively before your opponent can hurt you or your fellow Marines." Sarah nodded, understanding the criticism even though it stung. She had been holding back, trying to demonstrate technical proficiency rather than genuine fighting intensity. Vasquez was right. Real combat required a different mindset, a willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect herself and her fellow Marines. Yes, sir, she replied. I understand. Do you? Vasquez asked, stepping closer and studying her with the intensity of someone evaluating a piece of equipment. Let me ask you something, Martinez. What happens when you're deployed and you encounter an enemy fighter who's bigger than you, stronger than you, and has no intention of fighting fair? What happens when someone is trying to kill one of your fellow Marines, and your ability to stop them quickly is the only thing standing between life and death? The questions were pointed and uncomfortable, but Sarah recognized them as challenges rather than criticisms. I stopped them, sir, she said simply. Whatever it takes. Vasquez nodded slowly. Good answer. But answers are easy. Let's see if you can back up your words with actions. Vasquez called out to the largest recruit in the platoon, a massive kid from Montana named Rodriguez who stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed nearly 250 pounds. Rodriguez had been consistently dominant during hand-to-hand combat training, using his size and strength to overpower opponents who couldn't match his physical attributes. Rodriguez, Vasquez said, you're going to help me demonstrate something important to recruit Martinez and the rest of the platoon. I want you to fight her like your life depends on it. No holding back. No going easy because she's smaller than you. Fight like you would fight if someone was threatening your family. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as Rodriguez approached the training mat. She had sparred with him before during earlier training sessions, and he had always been careful not to use his full strength against her. But she could see in his eyes that this time would be different. Vasquez had given him permission, had ordered him, to fight at full intensity. Martinez, Vasquez said as Sarah took her position on the mat, Rodriguez outweighs you by 80 pounds and has a reach advantage of at least 6 inches. In a fair fight, he wins every time. So don't fight fair. Use every advantage you have, speed, technique, aggression, intelligence, to win before he can bring his strength to bear. Remember, this isn't about proving you're as strong as he is. This is about proving you can beat him despite being smaller. The match began with Rodriguez immediately pressuring Sarah with his size and reach. He was faster than she had expected, and his technique was better than she remembered. Within seconds, Sarah found herself in serious trouble, defending against attacks that could end the match instantly if she made a single mistake. But as the pressure intensified, something clicked in Sarah's mind. She stopped thinking about technique and started thinking about survival. She stopped worrying about fighting fair and started looking for any advantage she could find. She used her speed to stay out of Rodriguez's range, her agility to attack from unexpected angles, and her conditioning to maintain a pace that gradually wore down his stamina. The turning point came when Rodriguez attempted a takedown that would have ended the match in his favor. Sarah recognized the attack early, and instead of defending conventionally, she used Rodriguez's momentum against him, redirecting his energy and sending him crashing to the mat harder than he had intended. Before he could recover, Sarah was on him, using a submission hold that leveraged technique against strength in a way that made his size irrelevant. Rodriguez was forced to tap out, acknowledging defeat in a match that everyone watching had expected him to win easily. But, more importantly, Sarah had demonstrated something that couldn't be taught: the ability to find a way to win when the odds were stacked against her. Outstanding, Martinez, Vasquez said as the match ended. That's exactly what I was looking for. You stopped fighting Rodriguez's fight and started fighting your own fight. You used your advantages to neutralize his advantages. That's what Marines do in real combat situations. Sarah came to attention, her uniform soaked with sweat, and her breathing still labored from the intensity of the match. Thank you, sir, she managed to say. But Vasquez wasn't finished. Don't thank me yet, he said with a slight smile, because now we're going to find out what you're really capable of when the pressure is highest. The next phase of training involved scenarios where multiple opponents attacked simultaneously, where weapons were introduced, and where the stakes were raised to simulate life or death situations. Sarah found herself facing challenges that pushed her far beyond anything she had experienced during her time at Paris Island. In one exercise, she was required to fight her way through 4 opponents while protecting a wounded Marine who couldn't defend himself. In another, she had to disarm an armed opponent while operating in near-total darkness. Each scenario was designed to test not just her fighting skills, but her ability to think tactically and make split-second decisions under extreme pressure. But the ultimate test came on the final day of Vasquez's training program. Sarah found herself facing an opponent who was unlike any of the other recruits. Vasquez himself had volunteered to serve as her final challenge, and Everyone present understood that this was an unprecedented honor and an almost impossible task. Gunnery Sergeant Vasquez was not just larger and stronger than any opponent Sarah had faced during training. He was also faster, more experienced, and more technically proficient than anyone she was likely to encounter outside of actual combat. Fighting him was like fighting a machine designed specifically to identify and exploit every weakness in an opponent's defense. "This is your final examination, Martinez," Vasquez said as they faced each other on the training mat. "Everything you've learned, everything you've practiced, everything you believe about yourself as a warrior is going to be tested in the next few minutes. I want you to understand that I'm not going to take it easy on you just because you're a recruit. I'm going to fight you like you're a threat to Marines under my command. Your job is to prove that you can handle that level of intensity and still find a way to win." The words sent a chill through Sarah's body, but they also ignited something deep inside her that she had never felt before. This wasn't about proving herself to skeptical instructors or hostile fellow recruits anymore. This was about proving to herself that she had what it took to protect Marines in real combat situations, regardless of the odds or the opposition. The match began with Vasquez immediately establishing dominance through superior positioning and technique. Sarah found herself defending against attacks that were faster, more powerful, and more precisely targeted than anything she had ever experienced. Within seconds, she realized that everything she thought she knew about fighting was inadequate for this level of competition. But as the match continued, Sarah began to adapt. She stopped trying to match Vasquez's technique and started looking for opportunities to use her